What's good, everybody? I'm Keandre, this is HoopIntellect, and welcome back to the channel. Now, I apologize for the lack of content lately. I've had some things that I've been working on that you guys will eventually see on this channel, and a few other big important things that I had to take care of, but we are back, and the uploads should be a little bit more consistent as we get closer into March Madness, the Combine, lottery, draft season, all that good stuff coming up in the next several weeks and months. But yeah, it's past due an update on everything that's been going on in this class, so let's go ahead and get into it, starting with some of those right outside the top 60 but are still well deserving of being mentioned with the rest of this group. There are still a ton of prospects I wish I could have gotten in there that are still worth mentioning. That starts with those in blue, the Kevin McCullers, Trevin Brazil due to injury, Coleman Hawkins, Andre Jackson, Baylor Shireman, Kobe Brown. They're very much still in the mix with those that we'll talk about in a second. Those in green are more prospects for next year or in the future, but still keeping tabs on them if they do declare. Riley Kugel, Amari Bailey, Rylan Griffin, JJ Starling, among a few others that have impressed early on in their careers. And then sleepers like Tristan Da Silva, Ben Shepard, Jalen Lawson, and DeShondre Washington are worth keeping an eye on as well. We could go on and on talking about some of those in the fringe range, but on to the top 60. I think people got a bit carried away and only watched highlights, but I do still think Grant Nelson is definitely worth a flyer, just given his raw skill set as a rangy forward and his high level defensive upside playing out at North Dakota State.
Points for Levi.
Providence's Bryce Hopkins has continued looking like the Big East Player of the Year. He's really been shooting the ball well lately, and I think his versatility, size, and overall impact should get him more attention, even with some of the defensive and finishing questions. An athletic energy big who has a great motor and is switchable and can mix it up in terms of coverages and provide some rim protection, Adembona is a really solid bet as a freshman. He's not going to give you much else outside of that and just finish some plays above the rim, but a lot of teams could use it for sure. Azuolas Tubelis is worth a second round pick to bet on his touch inside and ability to make plays. He's been better defensively and really put up some impressive numbers this year. I think there are obvious questions about his NBA role, but when we get this late, he's someone who just makes sense to give a chance to. I think I'm settling on Trey Alexander being Creighton's best long-term prospect, and he's been huge in them turning around their season. I still think he's got a lot of room to grow physically, but as a 6'4", 6'5" off guard who can really score and shoot it and has been pretty good defensively, you can make the case he's still too low on this list. I'm still in on Mike Miles, and I think TCU's fall from grace being 3-6 without him illustrates his value as a player, and you see he returns and they blow out Oklahoma State. He's a dynamic scorer. He's improved a ton as a passer from year one to now. If he can stay healthy from March, I think he climbs into everyone's board in mocks and really shows out on that stage.
Miles poked it free from Sherfield.
Indiana's Trace Jackson Davis has been ridiculous this year and probably a top 5 player at worst in the country. And though he hasn't shot the ball like I've been waiting for him to do the past 3 years as, this tweener 4-5, I do like his energy, his athleticism, and defensive versatility. I think that gives him enough to work with at the next level. He'll probably have just turned 23 by the time that you're watching this, but I do think that he's draftable in the second round. If we want to talk highlights and flashes, Mo Gay has some of the most impressive in the class outside of the obvious guys at the top as a super fluid 7-footer who has been attacking closeouts, making high-level passes, and even shooting the 3 among more traditional big work. He's got work to do improving his awareness and as a rim protector defensively, but as you're watching right now, it's pretty easy to see the appeal on first watch. There are a few tough-nosed guard defenders in this class, and Reese Beekman is one of them. He hasn't quite taken the scoring jump that I would have liked to see from him this year and has dealt with his good share of injuries throughout, but as a guy who can really guard, plays with a lot of energy, has good feel, and can knock down a 3, Beekman checks those boxes and is certainly draftable for it. Jaime Jaquez has given me a little more confidence in his NBA outlook lately. He's been shooting the 3 more, mixing it up on the perimeter to go along with that solid defense and all-around good feel for the game. I'm still a bit lower on him given he's undersized, isn't a great athlete, and will still need to improve as a shooter to make it all really work, but he can play, and I think it's worth a shot somewhere in the second. Tucker DeFries is quietly one of the absolute best shooters in the country at 40% on 7 attempts a game. He's a 6'6", 6'7" sophomore wing who deserves a little more draft buzz than he's gotten. Now you can have the concerns about him athletically or on the defensive end, but he just finds a way to make plays and gets buckets. Whether he declares this year or next, I think he's somebody who has a good chance for carving out a role with his elite skill. Marquez Oso-Ighodaro has a really intriguing combination of skills at 6'9". He's one of the best passing bigs in the country. He's versatile and active defensively and is effective at finishing close to the bucket. He's definitely someone I expect teams to take a real look at in the second round for those reasons, and could be one of those combine or draft night risers. Jalen Clark has been a menace on the defensive end all year long. He's currently had 3 or more steals in 13 of the last 17 games, and his improvements on the offensive end have made him a real NBA prospect. I'm not 100% sold there in terms of the spot shooting, but he's been much better than he has been in the past, and he's made plays consistently. I think he's an NBA guy and probably the best prospect on UCLA to me. K-State has taken a step back from what was a ridiculous run up until late January, but Keontae Johnson remains a real prospect medicals willing. Big physical wing who can shoot it, make plays, and defend up is a good bet in that mid-second round range, even at his age, and he still remains one of the more remarkable overall basketball stories in recent memory. Marcus Sasser is probably going to be one of the more prominent players in March Madness. He's kind of made for that setting, and Houston is obviously one of the best teams in the country. And when it comes to his draft prospects, while I'm not the biggest fan of the older, smaller guards, he's got a great skill set as a tough shot creator who can defend and has, in the macro, improved as a decision maker, which is a good recipe for an eventual rotation guard. Santa Clara's Brandon Podziemski has really turned heads over the course of the year and proven his NBA value. He's a smooth lefty guard who has a knack for getting to spots on the floor. He's crafty, and while he's not the big time separator or athlete, he makes up for it in other ways and has been lights out from 3. I continue to like him as a top 40-ish guy, and over the last month he's averaging about 25, 7, and 3.
You don't want that to happen this half.
Tristan Vukcevic has continued to be a really solid player for Partizan this year and convinced as an NBA prospect. He's shooting the ball better at 40% on 2.5 attempts in just 16 minutes a game. He can put it on the floor some, make plays as a versatile forward, and has proven himself to be a real option in what's actually turned out to be a decent international class outside of Wemby. Now, Amani Bates has had some truly wild performances this year, particularly against Toledo and Ball State, and that shot making and shooting ability has been on full display for most of the year. If he can land in the right situation, I really do think that he can be an impact player, but there's a lot going on with the rest of his game. He's not a great athlete, and the difficulty of some of these shots has always worried me, but when we start getting into that second round, I like him as a potential microwave guy if you're confident in him buying in and really focusing on rounding out his game just a little more. Now, Julian Phillips is much more of a project pick than I anticipated he would be. There's something to be said about this Tennessee situation. They don't really shoot the 3, the 250th in pace, and outside of being really good on the offensive glass and showing a lot of high-level flashes defensively, it's definitely been a work in progress for him. I still think he's got good potential as a role guy in the league. He's got the tools, and I liked his shooting outlook a lot more at Link last year, but team to team, there are some more proven options I'd probably prefer at this point. Though he's not great at any one thing yet, CD Sissoko is still an intriguing young player. At a listed 6'8", he's made a lot of eye-popping plays throughout the year and made some things happen on cuts and attacking closeouts. I like his potential defensively as well, though he has a lot of work to do on that end. And overall, I just think there's enough pieces to still be in on him long term. Jordan Walsh remains one of the best wing/point of attack defenders in this class. He's been better offensively lately, and really the long-term pitch with him is just being able to knock down enough shots to be respected and also not get sped up and make some solid decisions when he does get the ball. I think I've settled on him being a viable option in this range and a long-term high-level role guy that I'd be willing to bet on.
By Walsh, shared it.
Jalen Wilson has been on a run about as good as I've seen from anyone at KU during the Bill Self era. He's needed to play at this level for them to be an elite team, and he's really answered the call in a big way. His improvements as a shooter and with the ball in his hands has made him a real prospect, and someone I think should stick around in this area, even being an older guy. The role that he plays at the next level is going to come all the way back down to earth, but I'm hoping that he can continue to make it happen in that lower volume type of situation. I really enjoyed watching Terrence Shannon Jr. this year. I really like his energy and athleticism. The percentages haven't been there all the way, but he's grown as a shooter and with the ball in his hands. And he's a pretty good defender when he wants to be. Overall, he's a good slashing wing prospect who I think is a viable option in that early to mid second and should carve out a role if he can continue to trend upwards as a shooter. Nikola Jurisic has continued his run of solid play, still at just 18, almost 19 years old. A 6'8" wing with his combination of ball skills, shooting potential, and size is always going to find himself a good amount of suitors. DaRon Holmes has cooled off a bit since the last board that we did, but he's definitely still one of the better bigs in the class and a very good option in that late first, early second round type of range for his abilities as a play finisher, his growing skill set, and abilities as an athlete. Ricky Council IV has continued to have a big impact on Arkansas' success this season. As a 6'6" wing, I love his energy and athleticism and his ability to make and create shots on different parts of the floor. He's still got a ways to go as a three-point shooter and he's got to make quicker decisions, but he's a guy I think figures it out and at least has the pieces to do so. Keeping it simple with James Najee again, he's got potentially the best motor in the class. He's a very good athlete, lob threat, and is versatile defensively. Still at just 18 playing for Barcelona. Based on the last couple years, I don't think he's giving you much more than that during his career, but as an energy big, it's obvious what he brings to the table. This tier is still pretty loose and will likely eventually get split further at some point, but for now I like these guys in the second round and still think many of them could rise for me by the time we get to June. Julian Strawther has had some big time performances over the last month, and like we mentioned before, the case with him is a pretty easy one to make. A wing shooter with great experience and someone who can put it on the floor and at least get to that floater makes a lot of sense. I haven't loved what I've seen from him defensively, at least on the ball, but I do think he can be passable on that end, which gives you a potentially solid complementary guy at the next level. Leonard Miller has shown far too much upside and performed too well in the G not to consider him in this range. He's currently putting up 16 and 9, shooting 33% from 3, being a versatile weapon still at just 19 years old, and he's also 6'10". I think the point forward outcome is much less likely than it seemed pre-combine last year, but again, a big versatile weapon who can defend, handle it some, and hopefully shoot it eventually is a good bet to swing on in this sort of range. I still happen to believe in Kel'el Ware quite a bit long term, despite playing like 15 minutes or less over the last 2.5-3 months. I just think bigs who have shown his level of athleticism, fluidity, versatility, and shooting potential should be valued fairly high. He's far from the surefire Lotto guy that we thought he'd be coming in, but I'm confident in him being a far better prospect long term than the role that he's kind of had this year as their third big at Oregon.
Grit, toughness. Yes.
He had a really good start to the year, but Terquavion Smith still has many of the same things to work on in terms of finishing, decision making, and he is still on the smaller side physically. But I still like him as that microwave type of combo guard, and I think he can be electric there.
4 blocks in the game.
Michigan has had a pretty weird year, but they do have another prospect that has really emerged, and that is Kobe Buffkin. He's made great improvements as a shooter, though he's still kind of a work in progress there. He's been impressive defensively, he's a solid passer and very good at attacking, especially against shifted defenses. I wouldn't be surprised if he returns and tries to really go for it next year, but he's already proven himself as a league guy to me, and it's been great to see considering how his freshman season went. If Judah Mintz could shoot the 3, I think he's a consensus no-brainer first-round pick as a creative freshman guard, growing playmaker, and someone who has really impressed on defense even through that Syracuse zone. Now that 3-point question is a big if, considering that was what we were watching coming in, but I am a buyer long-term, and that's why I continue to like him a little more than the consensus does right now, and think he'll be a steal if he falls into the mid to late 40s.
Step in, a little leaning.
Derek Lively has really started to put it together and has been a lot closer to the guy that we expected to see this season. He's been an absolute force defensively, blocking shots at a ridiculous rate and defending in multiple spots on the floor. I think he has a chance to be very good on that end. And then while things haven't come to fruition offensively, I think he'll shine more with NBA playmakers as that play finisher. And at this point, I think late first is very reasonable for what he brings to the table. Bilal Coulibaly has really risen over the last couple of months, especially since earning real time with Mets 92 in Pro A, the team that obviously Victor Wembanyama plays on. I've really become a fan of his. He's still raw, but the combination of athleticism, defensive ability, and confidence in him growing as a shooter and his abilities to play off the ball, he's looking like a real top 40 guy and a viable late first round option to be intrigued by if he continues doing anything near what he's been doing. It's hard for me to see Kobe Jones not panning out in some type of capacity at the next level. He's not the quickest or most creative with the ball in his hands, but he's a talented defender. He's improved greatly as a shooter, and he makes winning plays on a routine basis. He's been one of the best players in the country, and he'll be key in taking Xavier on a run in March. And I think he brings those winning complementary qualities to the league. Noah Clowney had a stretch there in January where he couldn't buy a 3. I think he went like 0 for 20, over 21 in a 5-game span, but he's since resurrected that, and in terms of mechanics, I really buy him as a shooter long term. In addition to that, he's been a threat as a role man, both scoring and as a passer. He's attacked closeouts, he's a versatile defender, and someone I think has a lot of value in the modern NBA. We'll get more detailed in his scouting report down the line and talk where he's at in comparison to some of his reputation in certain areas, but I'm very much in on him being a first round prospect and really like his game. Outside of the Virginia game, which was just a very weird game down to the ending in general, Kyle Filipowski has been a much needed consistent presence for Duke, and he's got a game that could look even better at the next level. I am still a little worried about his finishing at the rim, given he's under 50% in the half court as a 7-footer, and the 3-point shot hasn't fallen as much as you'd like, but you can see his skill set on a nightly basis. I love his aggression, and I think he can be solid defensively. Iowa's Chris Murray has been the model of consistency this year, just finding ways to make it happen, really taking on this higher usage role. He's not quite as dynamic or fluid a mover on both ends as Keegan, but he's solid and is going to make one of those teams from like 17 to 26 really happy with what he brings as a complimentary wing slash forward.
16-6, 7-4, Murray whirling in the left.
Jordan Hawkins has continued to be a sniper and the life of UConn's offense in a lot of ways. He's easily one of, if not the best shooter in this class, and likely going to be a very good option for a team in that mid to late first round, as there's a ton of value in his skill set as a high level complimentary guy. Ryan Rupert has consistently impressed me with what he does defensively at 6'7" with long arms, and still being just 18 in the NBL. Now he's going to need some time to develop. Offensively, he's got a lot of room to grow, but I do think he's a first round guy and could be a steal long term in the right situation. Big fan of this tier. Like usual, there's still an argument to be made for a couple of these guys in that next group we'll talk about, and also some others in the 30s joining this one, but I'm pretty confident in them here right now. Dariq Whitehead was out for several weeks with what looked to be a very scary injury. In fact, he's shooting 50% from 3 in conference play, and given that was a swing area for him coming in, that's been really good to see. I still think there are too many unanswered questions for me to be super confident in him in the late lottery, but he's at least in the mix right now and safely in my top 20 as we head into March.
Again with the kick out, here's Whitehead.
Jalen Hood-Schifino has continued to climb up boards over the course of the season, and it's easy to see why. A combo guard with good size who has shown that he can defend, make plays for others, and has knocked down shots at an impressive rate, really ahead of schedule, is always going to get you a lot of draft buzz. And in addition to that, he makes winning plays, and that combination of things now has him rightfully in lottery contention. GG Jackson remains one of the more interesting prospects in the class, and honestly of the last couple years, for a number of reasons, but his upside as a 6'9" wing with his level of shot creating potential is still enticing. His team is pretty bad, and the concerns have been pretty visible when his shot isn't falling or he isn't getting his touches. And in addition to all of that, he had a situation where he went on IG Live and voiced his frustration with how he was being used late in games, and of course ended up getting benched for it. It's not that important long term, but it's kind of illustrated his youth. But getting back on track, I'm not as high or confident in him as I was earlier in the year, but at a certain point his talent is definitely worth betting on in the teens, even though the shooting numbers haven't necessarily shown it. The appeal with Taylor Hendricks is pretty obvious. A 6'9" freshman who's an active and versatile defender that can protect the rim, he can shoot the three and finish as an athlete at the rim. It's a pretty easy case to be made. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a team grab him in the late lottery. That's the type of talent that he is in the year that he's been having for UCF.
Then Pullhouse got the ball poked up from behind. There's Hendricks in the corner.
Max Lewis hasn't been quite on the level that he was to start the year. He's been on a bit of a slump as a shooter as well, but at the same time, it's hard for me not to see him as a lottery level guy for his all-around game as a 6'7" wing. He's got to stay out of foul trouble and limit his turnovers. Those have really been hurting him lately, but again, 6'7", makes an impact defensively, can shoot it, make a play off the dribble. Really easy to be a fan of what he brings to the table. To me, Jet Howard has become somewhat underrated recently. I think he's far too talented a shooter and dynamic with the ball in his hands at times at 6'8" to not, at the very least, be considered in this range. Now we can point to some of the defense, his lack of activity on the glass or the lower free throw rate. He's far from perfect as a player or prospect, but what he does do is so obviously translatable to the next level. I think he's only scratched the surface so far. Kansas's Grady Dick just makes too much sense not to have in this sort of range at the moment. He's a knockdown shooter with great size and good feel for the game, and has at times shown exactly what we wanted to see from him in terms of taking advantage of what the defense has given him, attacking closeouts and getting all the way to the bucket. I'd still like to see him be even more aggressive at times. I think his play will kind of define their season in some ways when they start to key in on Jalen Wilson and DeJuan Harris isn't able to make it happen. But long term, I think he's going to be a very high level complimentary guy and make a team very happy with what he brings. He should carve out a role fairly quickly. Even with a couple games that weren't up to standard, Bryce Sensabaugh has remained an extremely productive scoring prospect and has done it while being wildly efficient. I think there's still reason to question his defensive abilities and some of the decision making, though I actually think that he is a capable playmaker. But other than those areas, I think he's someone who should be valued a little more than he currently is.
All-American, but why would you want to play for Coach Brad?
Anthony Black has played some of his best basketball as of late, and even through some of the real concerns I have about him as a shooter, his in-between game and just in his half-court offense, is definitely worth betting on given how good he is pretty much everywhere else. He's in that same family of like a Josh Giddey and Dyson Daniels as prospects in different ways, but maybe is still a talent really worth betting on, especially given we already know exactly what it is he needs to focus on to maximize his potential. Another guy I'm confident in making an impact at the next level is Cason Wallace. We had questions about him as a shooter. He's answered those pretty consistently, though he'll have an off night here or there. And he started to grow in hitting shots in the pick and roll and finding spots to attack. He's likely not going to be a primary and lacks some creativity as an overall playmaker, but he's solid and of course a game changer on defense. Nick Smith Jr. has been one of the tougher guys to evaluate for most of this year, but he's returned to the team since rehabbing his knee and seemingly weighing his options in the process, and has some really good moments against Florida and definitely against Georgia where he went for 26 points. He's moving much better than he was earlier in the year, and right now I think I'm confidently back in on him being a top 10 guy who honestly could even climb back up higher down the stretch. Despite some of the inefficiency and inconsistency that has popped up in certain areas, I'm still a fan of what Keontae George has as that scoring combo guard. I still like his upside as a passer and even defensively, even though he's been a bit more inconsistent there than he was earlier in the year and can get tunnel vision at times. With the ball in his hands, he's creative, electric when he's hot, and supremely confident. And those complementary skills that we've talked about give him a floor that I think makes up for some of the lack of elite burst. And for all that combined, I think he's going to make it happen in the NBA. Lasar Thompson is still the better shooting prospect of the Twins, but he has taken a bit of a step back in terms of percentages lately, going 2 for 15 in his last 4 contests. Regardless, I still like Lasar as a top 10 guy. We know what he brings to the table as a special athlete and with his potential defensively to keep him up here, and he's no slouch as a passer himself. Now, if you've watched Jarris Walker at all in the new year, you know that he's been on a complete tear, still bringing that great defensive versatility, shooting the ball at a super high clip, and showing a lot more flashes as a self-creator and passer than earlier in the year. Now, he hasn't been perfect, but I think that he's been worthy of moving up on the board. I saw him play at Wichita State in person, and while he started off really slow offensively, he hit 2 big threes down the stretch and took them with confidence. He was active defensively all night, made some really impressive passes throughout. And he's a guy I'm really excited to watch grow, and think that top 5 is very much within the realm of possibilities.
Walker, free throw jumper.
As I was finishing this video, details came out on Brandon Miller's alleged involvement in the Darius Miles Michael Davis case, and given all the information is still coming out, I'm going to let you guys do the reading on that and follow along to it. Now, the DA said that Miller hasn't been charged, he can't be, and has been cooperative with law enforcement this entire time, so that's all we can really hold on to definitively right now, especially those of you with the platform. But yeah, you know, this is at the very least a bad look. I would imagine there could be some type of non-legal consequences, whether that's him not playing the rest of this year or in his draft stock down the line. But we'll wait on that in what's a tragic situation because a life was lost. Forget any potential basketball implications. Cam Whitmore's long-term upside is still pretty high in this class. There just aren't a ton of wings coming in these drafts with his level of power, physicality, and explosiveness mixed with what he's shown as a shooter and some of the self-creation. You throw in his defensive activity as well, and I'm a big fan of what he can bring in the top 10 of the draft. I do think he's got a lot of room for improvement in terms of decision making, but other than that, he looks the part and has some of the wildest star level flashes of anyone not named Victor Wembanyama.
7 to shoot, Whitmore releases.
I still like Amin Thompson as a top 5 prospect in this class. I think what he brings as a functional athlete and playmaker is truly special, and then you throw in some of the potential he has defensively, and it's a pretty ridiculous combination. The shot is always going to be the main focus, and it's going to have a real impact on him reaching his ultimate ceiling, but he's got some truly unique traits that I'm willing to bet on. Now, there seems to be this narrative growing about OTE, and though I've said many times that I would have preferred seeing them challenged and in a bit more structure, they are still playing against other 4- and 5-star guys, albeit younger, and are focused on growing their games at all times. I don't know, I just felt like some people seem to still be confused about that, and to me, Amin is still one of the class's premier prospects, flaws included.
Oh, that's a great skill. Eli for 3.
I do think there should be some sort of cutoff in this tier, probably somewhere between like 7 and 11, so that'll probably happen on the next one, but I can make an easy top 12 case for everyone here, so that's why it's been a little more difficult than in previous years. And of course, locked into number 2 in the class, once again, we have Scoot Henderson. He had been out again due to what was listed as an ankle and concussion injuries, but he did play in the Rising Stars competition in the G League Showcase. It wasn't his greatest performance in the Rising Stars in the setting that really means nothing, but you know, he still looked the part when he was out there on a team that was severely outmatched in terms of talent. He's one of the best guard prospects in recent memory and seems to have the mentality to push that talent to star level, and for all that, he's going to continue to be the number 2 guy for me. And at number 1, I have none other than Victor Wembanyama. You guys know who he is by now, and he's continued to be ridiculous and give you several plays a game that you didn't think were humanly possible before seeing it. But that's all I've really got to say about him at this point. He's absolutely special. I can't wait to see him in the NBA. Lottery night is going to be amazing, and his scouting report is going to be the most fun to put together probably I have ever had. So definitely be looking forward to that, and maybe another video or 2 out on him in terms of where he could land in the draft.
Over, spinning over to Blue Eye. Inside, single.
Yeah, I played with Benji a couple of years ago.
And of course, here's a look back at the entire board. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Once again, sorry for the brief hiatus, but we are back and the content should be coming out more consistently over these next several weeks. And then, you know, after that in the future, we've got the scouting reports coming out, you know, several times a week if everything goes according to plan, and then a few more ideas kind of sprinkled in between there. But be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you are new around here, and leave a comment down below with some of your thoughts on everything that we talked about in this one. But yeah, as always, I'm Keandre, this is HoopIntellect. Till next time, I'm out.